The call came on a Tuesday. I remember because I was in the middle of watering my orchids when Dr. Mendoza's office flashed across my phone screen. The blood work results were back, and they weren't good. Severe anemia concerning kidney function, and signs pointing to what they were calling early-stage lymphoma. More tests were needed immediately, and insurance would only cover about 30% of the specialized treatments. The estimated out-of-pocket costs made my heart sink, faster than my body was failing me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Have you talked to your family? The nurse asked gently. This isn't something you should go through alone, Mrs. Harlow. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. 67 years old, with silver hair, I still took pride in styling every morning. My hands, once smooth and elegant when I played piano at weddings around town, now spotted with age and trembling slightly as I gripped my phone. Behind me, on the refrigerator hung a photo of my daughter Caroline and her husband Derek, standing in front of their beautiful 2-story colonial house. The house with the mortgage I'd been quietly paying for the past 18 months. I never planned on becoming a widow at 43. When Thomas died of a sudden heart attack, I was left with an 11-year-old daughter, a mortgage, and a piano teaching business that barely covered groceries. His life insurance wasn't much, just enough to keep us from drowning immediately. The neighbors in our small Connecticut town brought casseroles and sympathetic smiles for exactly 2 weeks. Then the world moved on, leaving me to figure out how to raise Caroline alone. Those years weren't easy. I took on additional jobs: receptionist at the dental office during weekdays, cashier at the drugstore on weekends, and piano lessons crammed into every evening. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Caroline's dance lessons, braces, school trips. I made sure she never went without. If that meant I wore the same 3 outfits rotated for years or skipped meals when money was tight, so be it. I wanted her to have everything Thomas would have provided. Mom, you don't have to work so hard, she'd say sometimes, watching me massage my swollen feet after a double shift. I can get a part-time job too. I always refused. Your job is school. Get those grades, get that scholarship. And she did. Caroline graduated top of her class and earned a partial scholarship to Cornell. It wasn't enough to cover everything, of course. I refinanced the house, emptied what little retirement savings Thomas and I had managed to accrue, and took out a small personal loan. The day I dropped her off at her dormitory, watching her arrange her books alphabetically on the shelf, always so organized, my Caroline, I felt pure pride. Every sacrifice had been worth it. During her college years, I worked even harder, sometimes taking on tutoring students in math when demand for piano lessons dropped. My social life consisted of weekly phone calls with my sister Elaine in Ohio and occasional coffee with Margaret, the only friend who had stuck around after Thomas died. I dated exactly twice, both disasters that made me realize I was better off focusing on my work and daughter. Caroline met Derek during her junior year. He was studying business, came from a wealthy family in Greenwich, and had ambitions of working in finance. I met him during Parents' Weekend, handsome in a polished way with a firm handshake and an analytical gaze that seemed to be calculating something whenever he looked at me. Still, he adored Caroline, and she glowed around him. That was enough for me. They married 3 years after graduation. By then, Caroline had secured a position at a marketing firm in Hartford, and Derek was climbing the corporate ladder at an investment company. The wedding was lavish, mostly paid for by Derek's parents, who owned a vacation home in the Hamptons and traveled to Europe twice a year. I contributed what I could and smiled through the ceremony despite feeling painfully out of place among the country club crowd. "You'll always be welcome in our home, Eleanor," Derek's mother said to me at the reception, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she patted my hand. "We consider you family now." I nodded graciously. though something in her tone suggested I was a charity case being adopted, rather than an equal joining their family circle. The years passed quietly after that. I continued teaching piano, eventually building up enough regular students to quit my other jobs. My little Cape Cod house finally paid off, became my sanctuary. Caroline and Derek visited for holidays, bearing expensive gifts I didn't need and couldn't reciprocate in kind. They'd stay for exactly 2 nights, never more, before heading back to their busy lives. I watched from a distance as they purchased their dream home in West Hartford, a beautiful colonial with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees lining the driveway. Caroline sent professional photos of every room once they'd finished decorating. I kept those pictures in an album, turning the pages sometimes at night, imagining my daughter's life in those pristine spaces. Then came 2020, and everything changed. The pandemic shut down in-person piano lessons. At 65, I was suddenly trying to teach 7-year-olds how to position their fingers on keys through grainy Zoom connections. Many parents simply canceled. My income dropped by more than half. Around the same time, I began noticing the fatigue. At first, I attributed it to age and stress. Who wasn't exhausted during lockdown? But when I found myself needing to sit down after simply walking to the mailbox, I knew something was wrong. Still, doctor visits cost money I didn't have, so I ignored it, just like I ignored the bruises appearing on my arms without any remembered bumps or falls. Caroline and Derek weathered the pandemic differently. They both worked remotely from their spacious home office. They renovated their kitchen. They bought a Peloton. Then, in January 2021, Caroline called with news that momentarily brightened my increasingly gray days. "Mom, I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." I wept with joy. A grandchild, something I'd longed for but never pressed about. When we ended the call, I pulled out my knitting needles for the first time in years and began planning a baby blanket. Despite my worsening health, I had a reason to fight now. I wanted to meet this child, to hold them, to perhaps be the kind of grandmother I'd never had myself. But life rarely follows our carefully laid plans. In March, Caroline miscarried. She was devastated. I drove to their house despite my weakness, spending 3 days cooking meals, doing laundry, and holding my daughter while she cried. Derek was supportive but distant, retreating to his home office for urgent calls whenever the emotions became too raw. Before I left, Caroline squeezed my hand. "Thanks for coming, Mom. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." Those words carried me through the next difficult months as my health continued its mysterious decline. I cherished them, replaying them in my mind whenever I felt particularly alone. What I didn't know then was that the miscarriage had created fractures in Caroline and Derek's marriage. She never told me directly. I pieced it together from her occasional comments and the increasing strain in her voice during our calls. Derek had apparently expected her to bounce back more quickly, to return to her efficient, organized self instead of processing her grief. Then in August, Caroline called with troubling news. "Derek's company is downsizing. He's been let go." "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. How are you managing?" "We have savings," she said quickly. "And he's already interviewing. It's just, the timing is terrible. With everything else?" I heard what she didn't say. With the miscarriage, with their marriage on shaky ground, with the economy still recovering. "Do you need help?" I asked, already mentally calculating what I could sell. My mother's silver? The antique piano in the living room? No, we're fine. Really." Her voice was firm. "How are you doing? You sounded tired last time we talked." I lied, as I'd been doing for months. "Just a bit of insomnia, nothing serious." 2 weeks later, I received a strange call from Margaret, who lived just a few blocks from Caroline and Derek. "Eleanor, I ran into Caroline at Whole Foods yesterday. She mentioned they're thinking of selling the house because of Derek's job situation. I thought you knew." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I hadn't known. When I called Caroline later that day, she was evasive. "It's just an option we're considering. The market is good for sellers right now." Something in her voice told me it wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. I also suspected their savings weren't as substantial as she'd claimed. Caroline had always been proud to a fault, unwilling to admit when she was struggling. She'd gotten that from me. That night, I made a decision. I called the bank where I'd kept my accounts for 30 years and spoke with the manager, who knew me from my decades of faithful piano playing at his daughter's wedding. "Michael, I need to do something, and I need it done very discreetly." 2 days later, I'd arranged for direct transfers to cover Caroline and Derek's mortgage payments. The amount was substantial, nearly 2/3 of my monthly income, but I made it work by cutting back everywhere else. No heat above 62 degrees, no meat in my grocery cart, no new clothes or books or small indulgences. I told myself it was temporary, just until Derek found new employment, just until they got back on their feet, just until Caroline didn't have to worry about losing her home while still grieving her lost child. What I didn't tell myself, couldn't admit even in the privacy of my own thoughts, was that I was growing sicker by the day. The fatigue had become debilitating. The bruises multiplied. I began finding blood on my pillowcase from nosebleeds. That came in the night. Still, I avoided doctors, partly from fear of the diagnosis, partly because I couldn't afford treatment now that most of my money was going toward Caroline's mortgage. For 18 months, I kept up the payments. Derek eventually found a new position, but at significantly lower pay. Caroline never mentioned financial struggles during our weekly calls, and I never let on that I knew. I continued teaching piano to the handful of students who had returned post-pandemic, though some days I could barely sit upright at the bench. And then came the call from Dr. Mendoza's office, the blood work I'd finally agreed to after nearly fainting at the grocery store. The results that could no longer be ignored or wished away. Lymphoma. Treatment needed immediately. Thousands of dollars required. I had exactly $843 in my checking account, and no way to access more money without stopping the mortgage payments. My house was paid off but worth little in the current market without significant updates. I had no retirement fund left to drain, no valuables worth selling beyond sentimental items. For the first time since Thomas died, I realized I needed to ask for help. And there was only one person I could turn to. I called Caroline on a Sunday, knowing she would be home. We chatted about the weather, her job, the container garden she was starting on their patio. Then, swallowing my pride, I told her about the diagnosis. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mom?" Her voice was small. "How serious is it?" "Treatable," I said, trying to sound optimistic. "But I need to start right away. The thing is, the insurance won't cover most of it. I'm facing some significant out-of-pocket costs." Another silence. Then, "How much?" I told her the initial estimate. I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Mom, we're not in a position to help with that kind of money right now. Derek's new job pays less than half what he was making before. We're barely keeping the house as it is." If only she knew. If only she understood that the only reason they still had that house was because of me. But I said none of that. Instead, I said, "I understand. It was a lot to ask. I just thought—" "You should look into assistance programs," she interrupted. "There must be charities or something for cancer patients. Or maybe you could take out a reverse mortgage on your house." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of disappointment so profound it momentarily eclipsed my fear about the cancer. My daughter, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was suggesting I indebt myself rather than help me fight for my life. "I'll look into those options," I said quietly. "Good. And Mom? Try not to worry. These doctors always make things sound worse than they are. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the light change as afternoon faded into evening. The orchid I'd been watering when I received the diagnosis had begun to drop its blooms, white petals scattered across the windowsill like abandoned hopes. What happened next was not something I'd planned. It wasn't calculated revenge or a dramatic gesture meant to prove a point. It was simply what needed to be done. I called my bank and canceled the automatic payments to Caroline and Derek's mortgage company, redirecting those funds to a separate account for my medical expenses. It wouldn't cover everything, but it was a start. Then I called Dr. Mendoza's office and scheduled my first treatment. The following month, on the day the mortgage payment would have been due, I received a frantic call from Caroline. "Mom, something terrible has happened. We got a notice from the bank about our mortgage being late. Derek is furious. He says he made the payment, but there's no record of it. We can't afford to fall behind. If we miss another payment, they could start foreclosure proceedings." I listened to her panic, feeling oddly calm. "That sounds stressful, honey. What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Derek's contacting the bank, but they're saying they haven't received a payment in over a month. It doesn't make sense. We've never missed a payment." No, they hadn't, because I had been making them. "Mom?" Her voice changed, became hesitant. "I hate to ask this after our last conversation, but is there any way you could help us just this once? Just until we figure out what happened? We can pay you back as soon as Derek sorts this out with the bank." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of decades of sacrifice pressing down on me. All those years of putting Caroline first, of ensuring she never went without while I wore worn-out shoes and ate ramen noodles for dinner. All those nights I'd worked multiple jobs while she slept peacefully in her bed. All the times I'd said yes when every fiber of my being wanted to say no. "I'm sorry, Caroline," I said softly. "I wish I could help, but I need every penny for my treatments right now. But Mom, we could lose our house." "Yes," I said. "You could." The silence between us was thick with unspoken accusations. I could almost hear her thoughts. "How could you be so selfish? This is our home. We need this more than you need those treatments." "I have to go now," I said. "I have a doctor's appointment." I hung up before she could respond. Then I gathered my purse, put on my coat, and drove myself to the cancer center for my first round of chemotherapy. As the drugs dripped slowly into my veins, I thought about the path that had led me here. Not just to this sterile room with its industrial-strength disinfectant smell, but to this moment of finally putting myself first. Had I enabled Caroline's sense of entitlement by always prioritizing her needs above my own? Had my sacrifices taught her to expect sacrifice from me, as her due? The nurse adjusted my IV, her face kind but professional. "First time's the hardest," she said. "It gets easier." I wasn't sure if she meant the treatment or learning to choose yourself when everyone expects you to choose them. Either way, I hoped she was right. 3 days after my first chemotherapy session, I was still fighting waves of nausea and fatigue so intense it felt like my bones had been hollowed out and filled with lead. The side effects were brutal, but Dr. Mendoza assured me this was normal. "Your body is fighting 2 battles now," she explained during my follow-up. "Against the cancer and against the treatment itself." I managed to drag myself to the kitchen for tea when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Derek standing. On my porch, his normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. His expensive wool coat was unbuttoned despite the October chill, and his hair, usually gelled into corporate perfection, stuck up slightly at the back. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home. I wasn't ready for this confrontation, not while my body was still reeling from chemicals designed to kill the rogue cells multiplying inside me, but I knew he'd seen the lights on. There was no avoiding this. I opened the door but remained firmly in the threshold, blocking entry. Derek, this is unexpected. His eyes widened slightly as he took in my appearance. The chemo had only just begun, but already my skin had a grayish undertone and dark circles shadowed my eyes. I'd lost weight too rapidly, my clothes hanging loose where they had once fit properly. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "May I come in? It's freezing out here." It wasn't actually that cold, but I stepped aside anyway. No sense in giving the neighbors a show. Derek entered my modest living room, his tall frame making the space feel suddenly cramped. He declined my automatic offer of tea and remained standing, hands thrust into his coat pockets. "I think you know why I'm here," he said finally. I lowered myself carefully into my armchair, conserving energy. "I have some ideas." "The mortgage payments." His voice took on an edge. "Caroline tells me you've been making them for over a year without telling us." I didn't bother denying it. "That's correct. And now you've suddenly stopped because—" "What? You're angry Caroline couldn't give you money for these treatments you claim you need?" The word claim hit me like a slap. I maintained my composure with effort. "I don't claim to need treatment, Derek. I have lymphoma. The medical bills are substantial. I redirected the funds I'd been using to pay your mortgage towards saving my own life. It seemed a reasonable reallocation." Derek began pacing, his polished shoes clicking against my worn hardwood floors. "Do you have any idea what position this puts us in? We've been operating under the assumption that our housing was secure. We've made financial decisions based on our monthly expenses. Now suddenly we're facing potential foreclosure because you decided to play games." "Games?" I repeated, a flare of anger giving me unexpected energy. "Is that what you think I've been doing? Playing games? What else would you call secretly paying our mortgage for 18 months and then abruptly stopping without warning? It feels manipulative, Eleanor. Like you were creating a situation where we'd be dependent on you, and now you're using that. Dependence as leverage." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "That's quite a theory. Tell me, why would I want leverage over you and Caroline?" Derek stopped pacing and fixed me with a cold stare. "We both know you've never approved of me. You've always thought Caroline married beneath her potential." This was so far from the truth I was momentarily speechless. If anything, I'd worried. Caroline would never measure up to Derek's wealthy family's expectations. I'd spent years feeling inadequate around them, conscious of my simple clothes and modest lifestyle whenever we gathered for holidays or special occasions. "That's not true," I said finally. "I've always been grateful that Caroline found someone who made her happy." "Then why the secrecy? Why not just offer to help with the mortgage openly when you found out Derek lost his job?" I noticed he'd shifted to referring to himself in the third person, distancing himself from the failure the job loss represented. "Caroline told me you had savings," I said. "She insisted you didn't need help. I chose to help anyway, but discreetly to preserve her pride. And yours." Derek scoffed. "And we're supposed to believe this was all about protecting our dignity. You didn't think we deserved to know who was actually paying for our home? Would you have accepted the help if I'd offered it directly?" His silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I continued. "Your pride would have prevented you from accepting assistance from your mother-in-law, the piano teacher from the wrong side of town." "Don't try to make this about class differences," Derek snapped. "This is about honesty, about respect." "Respect?" I felt heat rising in my cheeks despite my exhaustion. Was it respectful when Caroline refused to help with my medical bills? When she suggested I take out a reverse mortgage on my only asset rather than offer any financial support? I've spent my entire life putting her needs first, Derek. I worked 3 jobs after her father died. I sacrificed my retirement to put her through college. And when she needed help, even when she denied needing it, I stepped in again. Now, the one time I ask for something in return, I'm denied and told to look into assistance programs. Derek had the grace to look uncomfortable. Caroline told me about your diagnosis. I'm sorry about that, but you have to understand our financial situation is precarious right now. So is my survival, I countered. Yet somehow I managed to find room in my budget for your mortgage for a year and a half. Derek moved to the window, looking out at my small backyard where the bird feeder hung empty, another casualty of my new financial constraints. What do you want from us, Eleanor? An apology? Money we don't have? What's the end game here? There is no end game. I'm not playing a game, remember? I simply made a choice to prioritize my cancer treatment over your mortgage, just as Caroline made a choice to prioritize your housing over my medical care. That's not fair. She didn't know you were the one paying our mortgage. And whose fault is that? I offered help when you lost your job. Caroline insisted you didn't need it. Derek turned back to face me, his expression hardening. So this is punishment then, for Caroline's pride. I shook my head, suddenly too tired to continue the argument. The chemo was catching up with me, dragging at my consciousness like an undertow. This isn't punishment, Derek. It's consequence. For years, I've shielded Caroline from the consequences of life's hardships. I've stepped in, smoothed the path, made sacrifices so she wouldn't have to. That was my choice as her mother, and I don't regret it. But I can't do it anymore. Not just because I need the money for treatment, but because it's time, past time, for both of you to face reality. Without me as a safety net. Derek stared at me for a long moment. Then he buttoned his coat with deliberate movements. I should go. Caroline doesn't know I'm here. This surprised me. You came without telling her? She's too upset to think clearly. I thought I could reason with you, make you see what you're doing to her. To us. And have you succeeded? I asked. He moved toward the door. Clearly not. I hope your treatments go well, Eleanor. Despite what you might think, I don't wish you ill. But don't expect Caroline to understand or forgive what you've done. She feels betrayed. The irony of his statement hung in the air between us. I know something about betrayal, I said quietly as he opened the door. Give Caroline my love. After Derek left, I dragged myself to the bathroom where I was violently ill. A delayed reaction to the confrontation or simply the chemo taking its toll, I couldn't tell. As I rinsed my mouth afterward, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My face was gaunt, my complexion sallow. My silver hair, which I'd always maintained meticulously, hung limp around my face. For the first time, I looked like what I was, a sick, aging woman fighting for her life. Not just against cancer, but against a lifetime of choices that had left me alone when I most needed support. I crawled into bed and pulled the quilt up to my chin, allowing myself a few moments of self-pity before mentally shaking it off. Self-pity wouldn't pay the medical bills. It wouldn't shrink the tumor. It wouldn't change Caroline's decision. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Margaret, checking to see if I needed anything from the grocery store. Since my diagnosis, she'd taken to shopping for me once a week, refusing any payment beyond gas money. Her kindness was a gentle counterbalance to my daughter's rejection. I texted back a small list and a bigger thank you, then drifted into an uneasy sleep, Derek's words echoing in my dreams. The next morning brought another visitor, this one even more unexpected. I opened the door to find Caroline's mother-in-law, Vivian, standing on my porch with a large wicker basket. Eleanor, she said, her voice as perfectly modulated as her appearance. I hope I'm not intruding. Unlike Derek, Vivian Hamilton had maintained her polished veneer. Her silver blonde hair was freshly styled, her camel coat impeccably tailored, her makeup subtle but flawless. If she was shocked by my diminished appearance, she hid it well. Vivian, I said, my hand automatically going to my unkempt hair. This is a surprise. May I come in? I've brought some things for you. She lifted the basket slightly. Curiosity overrode my embarrassment about the state of both my home and myself. I stepped aside to let her enter. Vivian moved through my living room with the confident grace of someone accustomed to occupying any space as if it were her own. She placed the basket on my coffee table and began unpacking it. Containers of homemade soup, premium tea, organic crackers, high-quality vitamins, luxury hand cream, and a cashmere throw in a soft shade of blue. My sister went through chemo last year, she explained as she arranged the items. These were the things she found most helpful. The ginger tea is excellent for nausea, and the throw doesn't irritate sensitive skin the way some blankets can. I stood watching her, momentarily, speechless. In all the years since Caroline had married Derek, Vivian and I had maintained a cordial but distant relationship. We had nothing in common beyond our children, and both of us knew it. Her appearance in my home, bearing gifts no less, was so unexpected I couldn't quite process it. "This is very kind of you," I managed finally. Vivian straightened, smoothing her coat. "It's the least I can do. Cancer is a terrible burden to bear alone." There was something in her tone, a hint of reproach, perhaps, that made me wonder how much she knew. "Won't you sit down?" I offered, gesturing to the sofa. "I can make tea." "Allow me," she said, moving toward the kitchen with the assurance of someone who expected to be obeyed. "You should be resting. Point me toward your kettle." Too tired to argue, I directed her to the necessary items and sank into my armchair. Moments later, she returned with 2 mugs of the ginger tea she'd brought, the scent spicy and comforting. "Derek called us last night," she said without preamble, settling onto my sofa with perfect posture. "He was quite distressed." So that explained her visit. I imagine he was. "He said you've been secretly paying their mortgage for some time, and have now stopped. He seemed to think it was some sort of manipulation on your part." I sipped the tea, which was indeed excellent, giving myself time to formulate a response. "Is that what you think as well?" Vivian's perfectly arched eyebrows rose slightly. "I try not to form opinions without hearing all sides. That's why I'm here." I considered deflecting, changing the subject, maintaining the polite fiction that had characterized our relationship for years. But the cancer had stripped away my patience for social niceties. When Caroline and Derek told me about his job loss, I offered to help. Caroline insisted they had savings and didn't need assistance. But I know my daughter. She's as proud as her father was. So I arranged to cover their mortgage payments without their knowledge. I continued doing so for 18 months until I received my diagnosis and needed those funds for my own medical care. Vivian nodded slowly. "And Caroline refused to help with your medical expenses." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes. She suggested charities and reverse mortgages instead." "I see." Vivian set her mug down precisely on a coaster. "That must have been disappointing." The understatement was so vast I nearly laughed. "That's one word for it." "Caroline called me in tears yesterday," Vivian continued. "She said you were punishing her for something, but she wouldn't explain what. Now I understand." "I'm not punishing her," I said, echoing what I'd told Derek. "I'm simply making a necessary financial decision." Of course. Vivian's tone was neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "Just as Caroline made her own financial decision regarding your treatment." We sat in silence for a moment, 2 mothers contemplating the choices and consequences that shaped our relationships with our children. "Did you know," Vivian said finally, "that Jonathan and I offered to help them with the house when Derek lost his position? Caroline refused. She said they were managing fine on their own." This was news to me. She never mentioned that. No, I don't imagine she would have. Pride is a family trait among the Hamiltons. Derek comes by it honestly. Vivian picked up her tea again. I wouldn't have known about your situation at all if Derek hadn't called in such a state. He seems to think they'll lose the house. That's certainly possible, I acknowledged. Without my contributions and with Derek's reduced income, the mortgage may be unsustainable for them. And how does that make you feel, Eleanor? The possibility of Caroline losing her home? I considered the question carefully. Sad, concerned, but also resolved. I can't continue prioritizing their housing over my medical care. And perhaps it's time they face the reality of living within their actual means, not the means they pretend to have. Vivian's lip curled slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. How refreshingly honest. Most mothers would claim to be devastated at their child's potential hardship, even if privately they recognize the necessity of the lesson. Cancer has a way of cutting through pretense, I said. I don't have the energy for anything but the truth these days. No, I don't suppose you would. Vivian set her mug down again and reached for her handbag. I should be going. I've taken enough of your time. I expected her to leave then. Our unusual interaction concluded. Instead, she withdrew a checkbook and an elegant pen. I'd like to help with your medical expenses, she said, uncapping the pen. How much do you need? I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry? For your treatment. The portion insurance doesn't cover. How much is it? Vivian, I can't accept that from you. She looked up from the checkbook, her expression unreadable. Why not? We're family, aren't we? Isn't that what your daughter should have said when you asked for help? The echo of my own thoughts was so surprising I couldn't formulate a response. I admire what you did for Caroline and Derek, Vivian continued. Not just the mortgage payments, but everything before that. Working multiple jobs after your husband died, sacrificing for her education, helping discreetly when they needed it, even when they were too proud to ask. She paused. Jonathan and I had advantages you didn't. Family money, connections. We never had to work as hard for Derek as you did for Caroline. I recognize that. Thank you, I said, still stunned by the unexpected turn the conversation had taken. So, the amount? She poised her pen above the check. I named the figure, the estimated out-of-pocket cost for the complete course of treatment. Vivian wrote without hesitation, tore the check from the book, and extended it to me. Consider it a loan if that makes it easier to accept, she said, though I don't expect repayment. I took the check, my hand trembling slightly. The amount was correct down to the dollar. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. Use it for your treatment. Focus on getting well. Vivian stood, smoothing her coat again. And perhaps don't mention this to Caroline or Derek just yet. They have some growing up to do, I think, before they're ready to understand this kind of support. I nodded, still processing the surreal nature of the encounter. Vivian moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Jonathan and I have been discussing downsizing. Our house is far too large for just the two of us now. We've been looking at condominiums downtown, easier to maintain, better access to amenities. If Caroline and Derek do lose their house, we might consider offering them our current home at a significant discount. With conditions, of course. What kind of conditions? I asked. Oh, I'm sure we'll think of appropriate ones. There was a gleam in Vivian's eye that suggested she already had several in mind. I should go. The soup is homemade. My housekeeper's. Recipe, not mine, I confess. It freezes well if you can't eat it all now. And then she was gone, leaving behind the basket of gifts, the check that would cover my medical expenses, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. I sat looking at the check for a long time after she left, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why would Caroline's mother-in-law, a woman who had barely acknowledged my existence for years, suddenly offer such substantial help? Was it guilt by association for her son and daughter-in-law's behavior? Genuine concern? or something else entirely. Whatever her motivation, the check in my hand represented something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not just for my cancer treatment, but for a future where I might not have to face every challenge alone. I carefully placed the check in my wallet, then moved to the kitchen to put away the soup Vivian had brought. As I was rearranging items in my refrigerator to make room, my phone rang. Caroline's name flashed on the screen. For a brief moment, I considered not answering. The confrontation with Derek had drained me, and I wasn't sure I had the strength for another emotional encounter. But something, perhaps Vivian's unexpected kindness, gave me courage. "Hello, Caroline." "Mom." Her voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk about what you've done." I sighed, closing the refrigerator door. "If you're referring to the mortgage payments, yes, we probably should discuss that. You had no right to do that behind our backs. No right to just stop without warning. Just as you had no right to expect me to continue indefinitely, especially when I needed those funds for medical treatment." "Ah, that's different. This is our home, Mom, where Emma will grow up, where we've built our life." The mention of my granddaughter, the child Caroline had miscarried, cut through me like a blade. It was a low blow, and Caroline knew it. "I understand that," I said, keeping my voice even with effort. "But my life is also at stake. The money I redirected to your mortgage for 18 months will now go toward keeping me alive. Surely you can see why that's a necessary priority." "We could lose everything because of you." The bank called again this morning. They're not being understanding at all. If we miss next month's payment too, they're threatening foreclosure proceedings. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was. Despite everything, I never wanted Caroline to suffer. I just couldn't sacrifice myself for her anymore. "Have you considered selling the house voluntarily? Finding something more in line with your current income?" "Sell our dream home? Are you serious?" Caroline's voice rose in pitch. "We can't downsize. What would people think? What would Derek's colleagues say if we suddenly moved into some starter home or apartment?" There it was, the real concern. Not losing their home, but losing face. Appearances had always mattered to Caroline, even as a teenager when we could barely afford the basics. She'd ironed second-hand clothes, meticulously arranged her school supplies just so, maintained a carefully curated image of someone who wasn't struggling financially. Derek, with his family wealth and corporate ambitions, had only reinforced this tendency. "People might think you're making responsible financial decisions based on your actual circumstances," I suggested. "That's hardly something to be ashamed of." "You don't understand. You've never understood what it's like to have to maintain a certain image. In your world, it's fine to drive an old car and shop at discount stores. In ours, it's social suicide." The dismissal stung more than it should have. My world, as you put it, was shaped by raising you alone after your father died. By making sure you had opportunities I never had. If I drove old cars and shopped at discount stores, it was so you could have dance lessons and college applications and the chance at a life beyond what I could provide. Caroline was silent for a moment. Then, in a softer voice, "I know that, Mom. I do. I'm grateful for everything you sacrificed. But this feels like you're taking it all back, like you're punishing me for not being able to help with your medical bills." "I'm not punishing you," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "I'm making a difficult choice between your mortgage and my cancer treatment. Just as you made a choice between my medical bills and maintaining your lifestyle. That's not fair. We genuinely can't afford to help you right now. Derek's new salary barely covers our expenses." "Your expenses include a house you can't afford without my help," I pointed out. "That's the reality, Caroline. If you truly can't afford to help me with medical costs, then you also can't afford your current home. Both statements are either true or false. They can't be selectively applied depending on what's convenient." She made a frustrated sound. Why are you being so cold about this? So, calculating? This isn't like you. The observation gave me pause. She was right. This wasn't like me. The Eleanor of 6 months ago would have continued the mortgage, payments regardless of her own needs, would have found some other way to cover her medical expenses, even if it meant going into debt or foregoing treatment altogether, would have put Caroline first, as she always had. But that Eleanor hadn't yet faced her own mortality, hadn't yet asked for help and been refused by the person she'd sacrificed everything for, hadn't yet realized that a lifetime of putting others first had left her alone when she most needed support. People change, I said finally. Sometimes because they want to. Sometimes because they have to. What does that mean? It means I've changed, Caroline. Cancer has a way of clarifying priorities. I still love you. That will never change. But I can't keep sacrificing my needs for yours. Not anymore. So you're just going to let us lose our home? After everything you've done to help us keep it? The irony of her statement wasn't lost. On me. I helped as long as I could. Now I need those resources for myself. That's not abandonment, Caroline. It's survival. Another silence stretched between us. I could almost see her pacing in her kitchen, the one with the marble countertops, and custom cabinetry that had been featured in a local home magazine last year. Finally, she spoke again, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Derek thinks we should sue you. This was so unexpected I actually laughed. Sue me? On what grounds? I don't know. Breach of promise, emotional distress, something. He's talking to a lawyer friend about it. Good luck with that, I said, still incredulous. There was no contract, no promise, no obligation. Just a mother helping her daughter in secret, and then needing those funds for her own medical care. I can't imagine any court would find that actionable. You think this is funny? Our lives are falling apart, Mom. No, I don't think it's funny, I said, sobering. I think it's sad. Sad that instead of looking for realistic solutions to your financial problems, Derek's first instinct is to threaten legal action against his sick mother-in-law. Sad that you're more concerned about appearances than about finding a sustainable living situation. Sad that after everything, we're having this conversation at all. Caroline was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming smaller, more vulnerable. I'm scared, Mom. I don't know what to do. Everything was fine, and then suddenly it wasn't, and now it feels like it's all slipping away. The admission, so honest, so unlike the controlled image she normally projected, caught me off guard. For a moment, I glimpsed the little girl who had cried in my arms after skinned knees and playground rejections. The teenager who had confessed fears about not being smart enough for college. The young woman who had called in tears after her first professional setback. My instinct was to comfort her, to offer solutions, to step in and fix things as I always had. But that pattern had led us here, to this painful impasse. Breaking it wouldn't be easy for either of us. I understand being scared, I said gently. I'm scared too. Cancer is terrifying. Facing it alone, even more so. You're not alone, Caroline protested. You have friends, your church group. But not my daughter, I finished for her. Not when it comes to financial support. Another silence. I don't know what you want from me, she said finally, a note of defeat in her voice. I don't want anything from you now, I replied truthfully. That window closed when you refused to help with my medical bills. What I want is for you to solve your own financial problems without expecting me to sacrifice my health or deplete my resources. Further, find a house you can actually afford. Adjust your lifestyle to match your current income. Make the hard choices adults have to make. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's necessary. just like my decision to redirect the mortgage. Payments toward my cancer treatment wasn't simple, but necessary. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of doctor appointments, chemotherapy sessions, and increasing physical weakness. Dr. Mendoza was cautiously optimistic about my response to the treatment, but warned me the path ahead would be long and difficult. Lymphoma responds well to treatment in many cases, she said during my checkup. But we need to be aggressive, especially given how long you waited before seeking medical attention. I didn't tell her that waiting had been less a choice and more a financial necessity. That every dollar diverted to Caroline's mortgage had been one less dollar available for my own health care. That seemed pointless now, with Vivian's check safely deposited and my treatment plan fully funded. The side effects intensified with each session. My hair began falling out in clumps, so I asked Margaret to help me shave my head preemptively. She arrived with electric clippers, a beautiful silk scarf, and a bottle of expensive moisturizer for my scalp. "You have a perfectly shaped head," she announced as the last of my silver strands fell to the bathroom floor. "Not everyone can pull off this look, but you're rocking it." I laughed weakly, studying my reflection in the mirror. The bald woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, gaunt, pale, with eyes that appeared too large for her face. Yet, there was something almost liberating about the transformation. The external change matched the internal one that had been taking place since my diagnosis, since Caroline's rejection, since my decision to finally put myself first. "Thank you for doing this," I told Margaret as she gently applied moisturizer to my newly bare scalp. "I know it's not how you plan to spend your Saturday." She met my eyes in the mirror. "That's what friends are for, Eleanor. Real friends show up when things get ugly." Her emphasis on real wasn't lost on me. Margaret had never fully approved of the way Caroline treated me, even before the current situation. "She takes you for granted," she'd said more than once over the years. I'd always defended my daughter, explaining away her behavior as the natural. Self-absorption of youth, then of a newlywed, then of a busy professional. Now, I wondered if Margaret had seen what I had been unable or unwilling to acknowledge. After Margaret left, I received a text from my sister Elaine in Ohio. She'd been calling more frequently since my diagnosis, despite her own health problems, and the demands of caring for her husband, who was in the early stages of dementia. "Meds arrived from that online pharmacy you recommended," the text read. "Saved us $137. How was treatment yesterday?" I smiled, typing back a brief update. Elaine had wanted to come stay with me when she'd first learned about the cancer, but I gently refused. Her husband needed her more than I did, and besides, there was little she could actually do here, beyond worry and closer proximity. Our weekly video calls and daily texts were enough. As I set my phone down, a calendar notification appeared on the screen. Caroline and Derek's anniversary dinner, 6:30 p.m. I'd completely forgotten. Each year since their wedding, I'd hosted a small anniversary dinner for them at my home. Nothing elaborate, just a home-cooked meal and a modest gift. It had become a tradition, one I'd maintained even during the pandemic, delivering a meal to their doorstep when in-person gathering wasn't possible. This year, I hadn't prepared anything. Hadn't shopped for ingredients or wrapped a gift or even sent a card. The realization brought a twinge of guilt, quickly followed by a more practical concern. Did they still expect me to host dinner tonight, despite everything that had happened? As if in answer to my unspoken question, my phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "I assume anniversary dinner is canceled this year?" The message was terse, accusatory. I could almost see the tight set of her lips as she typed it, the slight furrow between her brows that appeared whenever she was displeased but trying to maintain control. I considered how to respond. The easy path would be to apologize, to offer, to reschedule, to slip back into my familiar role as the accommodating mother. But that path led backward, to patterns I was trying to break, to expectations I could no longer fulfill. "Yes," I texted back simply. I'm not up to hosting during chemo. Happy anniversary to you both. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared. Again. Finally. Fine. Feel better. No. Thank you for the years you did host. No, that's understandable given your illness. Just, fine. I set the phone aside and moved to the kitchen to prepare a simple meal for myself. Soup from the batch Vivian had brought, reheated and paired with whole grain crackers. As I ate at my small kitchen table, I found myself wondering what Caroline and Derek would do for their anniversary instead. Would they go out to an expensive restaurant they couldn't really afford? Order takeout and eat in tense silence, resenting my absence? Skip the celebration altogether in protest? Not my problem, I reminded myself. Not anymore. After dinner, I was so exhausted I could barely make it to bed. The chemo was cumulative in its effects, each session leaving me weaker than the last. I curled beneath the cashmere throw Vivian had given me. It was indeed gentler on my increasingly sensitive skin than my other blankets, and fell into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I woke to multiple missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. There was a voicemail, which I played with trepidation. Mrs. Harlow, this is Stephanie Wilson from Hartford Memorial. Your daughter Caroline was admitted to the emergency room late last night. She's asked us to contact you. Please call back at this number as soon as possible. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. Despite everything that had happened between us, the thought of Caroline in danger triggered an immediate, visceral fear. I called the hospital back immediately, my hands shaking so badly I misdialed twice. This is Eleanor Harlow, Caroline's mother, I told the nurse who answered. What happened? Is she all right? Mrs. Harlow, your daughter was brought in around midnight with severe abdominal pain. The doctors have determined she's experiencing an ectopic pregnancy. She's currently being prepped for emergency surgery. An ectopic pregnancy. The words hit me like physical blows. Caroline was pregnant again, and now facing a potentially life-threatening complication. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. After her previous miscarriage, this pregnancy had ended before it had properly begun, and in the most dangerous way possible. I'll be right there, I said, already moving toward my closet to find clothes. Then reality reasserted itself. I was in no condition to drive, especially in my agitated state. Actually, I'll need to find transportation. Is her husband with her? Yes, Mr. Wilson is here. Your daughter is in good hands, Mrs. Harlow. The surgical team is excellent. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called Margaret. Despite the early hour, she answered on the second ring. Eleanor? Is everything okay? I'm sorry to call so early, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my inner turmoil. Caroline's in the hospital. Ectopic pregnancy. They're taking her to surgery. I need to get there, but I can't drive myself. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Margaret said without hesitation. Do you need help getting ready? No, I can manage. Thank you, Margaret. I dressed carefully but quickly, choosing loose, comfortable clothing that wouldn't exacerbate my chemo-induced skin sensitivity. I tied the silk scarf Margaret had given me around my bare head, applied a touch of tinted moisturizer to my pallid face, and took my anti-nausea medication as a precaution. The last thing Caroline needed was her mother vomiting in the hospital waiting room. Margaret arrived exactly when she promised, her silver SUV idling in my driveway. I locked up and made my way carefully down the porch steps, acutely aware of how unstable I felt on my feet. The combination of cancer, chemo, and now this sudden crisis was taking its toll. Do you know any details? Margaret asked as we pulled away from my house. Just that it's an ectopic pregnancy and she's going into surgery. I didn't even know she was pregnant again. After the miscarriage last year, she might not have known either, Margaret said gently. Sometimes ectopic pregnancies aren't detected until there's an emergency. The thought brought little comfort. If Caroline hadn't known, the shock would be even worse. No time to prepare emotionally. just sudden pain and trauma and loss. We arrived at Hartford Memorial in record time, thanks to light Sunday morning traffic. Margaret insisted on accompanying me inside despite my protests that she'd done enough. "I'll just get you settled," she said firmly. "Make sure you have what you need. Then I'll go if you want privacy with your family." The emergency department was relatively quiet. A nurse directed us to a family waiting area near the surgical suite where Caroline had been taken. As we approached, I saw Derek pacing the length of the small room, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up as we entered, his expression flickering from surprise to something unreadable before he abruptly ended his call. "Eleanor," he said stiffly, "you didn't need to come." "Of course I did. She's my daughter." I moved to the nearest chair and sat down, grateful for the support. The walk from the car had drained what little energy I had. "How is she?" Derek ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "In surgery. They said it could take a couple of hours. The doctor called it a complex case, whatever that means." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, revealing the fear beneath his controlled exterior. Despite everything, I felt a surge of sympathy for him. Whatever our differences, Derek loved Caroline. That much I had never doubted. "She's strong," I said. "And medical technology for this kind of situation has improved tremendously over the years." He nodded absently, resuming his pacing. Margaret quietly excused herself, promising to return later to drive me home. Left alone with Derek, I watched him move back and forth across the small waiting area like a caged animal. His expensive loafers made soft tapping sounds against the linoleum floor. His shirt, probably put on hastily when the emergency began, was buttoned incorrectly, with one tail hanging longer than the other. "Did you know she was pregnant?" I asked finally, breaking the tense silence. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression haunted. "We've been trying since the miscarriage. Actively trying. But the tests were negative last week. We thought this month wasn't going to happen either." The revelation that they'd been actively attempting to conceive again surprised me. Caroline hadn't mentioned it during any of our weekly calls, not even before our falling out. Of course, there were many things she hadn't told me, like the true state of their finances, or her in-laws' offer of help, or her reconnection with her father. "I'm sorry, Derek. Truly." He nodded curtly, then glanced at his watch. "Her parents are on their way. They're about an hour out." It took me a moment to process what he'd said. "Her parents?" "Vivian and Jonathan," he clarified, as if I might have forgotten who his parents were. "They were at their lake house for the weekend. They're driving back now." "I see." I folded my hands in my lap to stop their trembling, a side effect of the chemo, exacerbated by stress. "Well, I'm sure Caroline will appreciate having everyone here when she wakes up." Derek didn't respond. He resumed pacing, checking his phone periodically. I closed my eyes, conserving energy, silently sending strength to my daughter in the operating room beyond the waiting area's doors. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, hurried footsteps approached. Vivian and Jonathan. Hamilton entered the waiting area, both looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Vivian's hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her usual perfect coif, and Jonathan's polo shirt was wrinkled, as if he'd grabbed it from a laundry basket. "Derek?" Vivian said, moving immediately to embrace her son. "Any news?" "Still in surgery," he replied, his voice muffled against his mother's shoulder. "The nurse said they'd update us soon." Jonathan clapped a hand on Derek's shoulder, his face grave. "She's in good hands, son. Dr. Brenner is the best in the state for this kind of procedure." Only after these exchanges did Vivian turn to acknowledge me. "Eleanor?" she said with a slight nod. "You're here." There was something in her tone, surprise perhaps or wariness, that suggested she hadn't expected to find me at the hospital. Given our last interaction, when she'd provided the check for my medical expenses, her reaction was puzzling. "Of course," I said simply. "The hospital called me." Jonathan, who had never spent more than 10 minutes in conversation with me despite our children being married for years, gave me a perfunctory greeting before turning back to Derek. The three of them clustered together, speaking in low voices, a family unit from which I was clearly excluded. I remained in my chair, suddenly feeling like an intruder despite having arrived before they did. The dynamic was painfully familiar. At weddings, holidays, and family gatherings, it had always been this way. The Hamiltons closing ranks, with Caroline gradually absorbed into their circle while I hovered at the periphery, too proud to show my discomfort, too polite to withdraw completely. A doctor in surgical scrubs appeared at the doorway, and we all turned toward her expectantly. "Family of Caroline Wilson?" she asked, her expression professionally neutral. Derek stepped forward immediately. "I'm her husband. These are her parents." The doctor glanced at the three Hamiltons, then at me sitting apart from the group. She noticed the discrepancy. 4 people when she'd asked for family, with one clearly not included in Derek's gesture. She gave no indication. "The surgery was successful," she said. "We were able to remove the ectopic pregnancy and repair the fallopian tube. There was significant internal bleeding, but we've controlled it. She's stable and being moved to recovery now." The collective. Relief in the room was palpable. Derek's shoulders sagged, and Vivian let out an audible sigh. Jonathan nodded firmly as if he'd expected nothing less. "When can we see her?" Derek asked. "She'll be in recovery for about an hour, then move to a private room. One person can go back to recovery with her, then the rest of you can visit, once she's settled in her room." Derek immediately volunteered to accompany Caroline in recovery, leaving the rest of us to wait. After he followed the doctor out, an awkward silence descended on the waiting area. Jonathan busied himself with his phone while Vivian sat primly in a chair opposite mine, her handbag balanced perfectly on her knees. "Eleanor," she said after a moment, her voice pitched low enough that Jonathan couldn't overhear. "I didn't expect to see you here." I raised an eyebrow. "As I said, the hospital called me. I'm still listed as Caroline's emergency contact, apparently." "Yes, but given your condition, I thought you might not feel up to visiting." Her gaze traveled briefly over my scarf-covered head, taking in the visible signs of my cancer treatment. "My condition doesn't prevent me from being here for my daughter in an emergency," I said evenly. "Just as it doesn't prevent me from noticing when someone is surprised to see me in a place I have every right to be." Vivian had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise. Didn't you?" I kept my voice neutral, but held her gaze. "You're generous. Help with my medical expenses doesn't give you exclusive rights to my daughter, Vivian." She glanced quickly at Jonathan, who remained absorbed in his phone before leaning slightly toward me. "That's not what I meant. It's just, Caroline has been quite upset with you. Derek told us about the mortgage situation. I thought perhaps you might be keeping your distance until things settled." "Keeping my distance? My daughter is having emergency surgery. Nothing would keep me away." Vivian nodded slowly. "Of course, I understand." But something in her manner suggested she didn't understand at all. There was a disconnect between her words and her body language, her careful glances toward her husband, her slightly too perfect posture. "Vivian," I said quietly, "is there something you're not telling me?" She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her linen pants. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do. Has something happened that I should know about?" For a moment, I thought she would continue the pretense. Then her shoulders dropped slightly, and she sighed. "It's not my place to say anything. Caroline and Derek should be the ones to tell you." "Tell me what?" My patience, already stretched, thin by worry and physical discomfort, was rapidly evaporating. Vivian hesitated, then apparently made a decision. After you stopped the mortgage payments, things became rather tense between Caroline and Derek. They argued constantly about finances, about your role in their lives, about what to do next. Then about 3 weeks ago, they came to us with a proposal. I waited, a sense of foreboding growing in my chest. They asked if they could move in with us temporarily, just until they sorted out their housing situation. Jonathan and I agreed, of course. Family takes care of family. The implication was clear, and stung more than it should have. While I had refused to continue supporting them financially, the Hamiltons had stepped in, reinforcing the narrative that they were the real family Caroline could depend on. "I see," I said, working to keep my voice steady. "And you didn't think I should know that my daughter had moved out of her home?" As I said, it wasn't my place to tell you. Caroline was quite adamant that she would handle it in her own way, in her own time. Which apparently meant not telling me at all. The realization hurt, though I tried not to show it. "So they've already moved in with you?" "Last weekend," Vivian confirmed. "They've listed the house with a realtor. There's been significant interest already, despite the challenging market. They hope to sell quickly and use the proceeds to pay off the remaining mortgage and start fresh with something more realistic." The word choice wasn't accidental, I was sure. Vivian was framing their decision as responsible and mature, exactly what I had suggested to Caroline during our last phone conversation. But instead of sharing this development with me, acknowledging that I had been right about their need to live within their means, Caroline had gone to her in-laws and cut me out completely. "Thank you for telling me," I said, with as much dignity as I could muster. "I appreciate your candor, even if it was belated." Vivian nodded, seemingly relieved to have the confession over with. "For what it's worth, I think they're making the right decision. The house was lovely, but frankly beyond their means, especially with Derek's reduced income. This gives them a chance to rebuild their finances without the pressure of a mortgage they can't afford." Again, her phrasing struck me as deliberate, echoing exactly what I had told Caroline, but presenting it as if it were a fresh insight from the Hamiltons rather than the advice I'd already given. "I told Caroline the same thing weeks ago," I said. "Suggested they find a home within their actual budget." "Did you?" Vivian looked genuinely surprised. "She didn't mention that. She made it sound as if you had simply cut them off without offering any guidance." Of course she had. It was far easier for Caroline to cast me as the villain who had abandoned them rather than admit I had offered sound financial advice she had initially rejected. The narrative of the cruel mother served her purposes better than the truth. That she had refused to accept reality until forced to by circumstances. Before I could respond, a nurse appeared to inform us that Caroline had been moved to a private room and could receive visitors. Jonathan stood immediately, pocketing his phone. "Shall we?" he said to Vivian, extending his hand to help her up. She rose gracefully, then turned to me. "Are you coming, Eleanor?" The question seemed genuine, but I hesitated. I had come to the hospital out of maternal instinct, drawn by the emergency without considering what would happen after the crisis passed. Now, faced with the reality of Caroline's deliberate exclusion of me from her life, I wasn't sure my presence would be welcome at her bedside. "I think I'll wait a bit," I said. "Give you all some time with her first." Vivian nodded, seeming to understand the complexity behind my decision. "That's thoughtful of you. We won't stay long. She needs her rest." After they left, I sat alone in the waiting area, processing what I had learned. Caroline had moved, out of her house, the house I had secretly helped maintain for 18 months, without telling me. She had turned to her in-laws instead, accepting from them the very help she had rejected when I suggested it. And through it all, she had apparently continued to blame me for their financial struggles, positioning me as the cause of their problems, rather than acknowledging my foresight. The hurt went deeper than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just that she had excluded me from this significant change in her life. It was that she had taken my advice while refusing to acknowledge its source, had made the exact decision I had suggested while continuing to resent me for forcing her hand. It was a peculiar form of rejection, one that validated my practical wisdom while simultaneously pushing me further away emotionally. I was still pondering this when my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Heading back to the hospital now. How are things? I replied briefly, updating her on Caroline's condition and the successful surgery. Then I made a decision. Rising carefully from my chair, I made my way to the nurse's station. "Excuse me," I said to the nurse at the desk. "Could you direct me to Caroline Wilson's room? I'm her mother." The nurse checked her computer, then gave me the room number with a kind smile. "She's just gotten settled, so try to keep the visit brief. She needs rest after surgery." I thanked her and followed the directions down a long hallway to Caroline's room. The door was partly open, and I could hear voices inside. Derek and his parents, speaking in low tones. I hesitated, then knocked lightly on the doorframe. The conversation inside stopped abruptly. After a moment, Derek appeared in the doorway, his expression guarded. "Eleanor, we thought you'd left." "I wanted to see Caroline before I go," I said. "Just for a moment." He glanced back into the room, presumably checking with Caroline or his parents, then stepped aside reluctantly. "She's very tired. Just a few minutes, okay?" I nodded and entered the room. Caroline lay in the hospital bed looking small and vulnerable among the white sheets. An IV dripped fluids into her arm, and a monitor beeped softly beside her. Her face was pale, with dark circles under her eyes, but she was awake, watching me approach with an unreadable expression. Vivian and Jonathan stood on the far side of the bed, forming a protective tableau. Their body language made it clear I was interrupting a family moment, a family that, in their minds, no longer included me. "Hello, Caroline," I said, moving, to stand at the foot of her bed. "I'm so glad the surgery went well." She regarded me silently for a moment, then said in a weak voice, "Thank you for coming." The formality of her response, as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than her mother, cut deep. But I maintained my composure, aware of the watchful eyes of the Hamiltons. "Of course. I came as soon as the hospital called. How are you feeling?" "Sore. Tired." She shifted slightly, wincing. "They said I'll need to stay overnight for observation. That's probably wise after what you've been through." An awkward silence fell. I desperately wanted to reach for her hand, to brush the hair from her forehead as I had done countless times when she was ill as a child. But the invisible barrier between us seemed impenetrable, reinforced by the presence of her in-laws on the opposite side of the bed, physically aligned with her against me. "Vivian told me about your move," I said finally. "I'm glad you found a solution that works for your situation." Caroline's eyes flickered to her mother-in-law, a flash of something, anger, betrayal, crossing her face. "Yes. We're very grateful to Jonathan and Vivian for their help." The emphasis wasn't subtle. The message was clear. They helped us when you wouldn't. "I'm sure you are," I said evenly. "It's good to have family you can rely on in difficult times." Derek cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The market's been surprisingly active. We've already had 3 showings in the first week, and there's an open house scheduled for next Sunday. The realtor thinks we'll have an offer by the end of the month." "That's excellent news," I said, though Caroline's continued silence suggested she didn't share his optimism about the quick sale. "I'm sure you'll find something more suitable once you're ready to look again." "They're welcome to stay with us as long as they need," Jonathan interjected, speaking directly to me for the first time since his arrival. "No pressure to rush into another purchase." The implicit message was impossible to miss. We can provide what you couldn't. We're the real safety net. We're the real family. I nodded acknowledgement but didn't respond directly to his statement. Instead, I addressed Caroline again. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can bring you tomorrow?" She shook her head slightly. "No, thank you. Derek will bring whatever I need." Another clear dismissal. Another reminder that I was peripheral, unnecessary, easily replaced by her husband and his parents. "All right then," I said, recognizing it was time to withdraw. "I'll let you rest. I'm just a phone call away if you change your mind." No one responded to this offer. I stood awkwardly for another moment, then turned to leave. As I reached the door, Caroline's voice stopped me. "Mom?" I turned back, hope flickering briefly. "Yes?" She hesitated, then said, "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." The words themselves were gracious, but her tone remained distant, formal. Still, it was something, an acknowledgement, however small, of our connection, of the fact that despite everything, I was still her mother, and she was still my daughter. "Always," I said simply, and left before the tears threatening at the corners of my eyes could fall. Margaret was waiting in the lobby, leafing through a magazine. She looked up as I approached, her expression immediately concerned. "Eleanor, what happened? You look like I've seen a ghost," I finished for her. "In a way, I have. The ghost of the relationship I thought I had with my daughter." In the car, I recounted everything: Caroline's coolness, the Hamiltons' protective stance, the revelation about the move. Margaret listened without interruption, her hands steady on the wheel, her face a study in controlled anger on my behalf. "So they've been living with Derek's parents for a week, and she never bothered to tell you?" she said when I had finished. "After everything you've done for them?" "Apparently so. And she's perfectly fine accepting help from them, just not from you." "Not just accepting help," I clarified. "Embracing exactly the solution I suggested, selling the too expensive house, finding something within their means, but giving them the credit for the wise counsel." Margaret shook her head in disbelief. "The ingratitude is staggering. Absolutely staggering." I leaned my head back against the seat, suddenly exhausted beyond words. The emotional toll of the hospital visit, combined with my already compromised physical state, had drained me completely. "The worst part," I said quietly, "is that I still love her. Despite everything, I still want to protect her, to make things better for her. Even knowing she'd rather turn to virtual strangers than accept my help or acknowledge my advice." Margaret reached over to squeeze my hand briefly. "That's what makes you a good mother, Eleanor. You love unconditionally, even when it's not reciprocated the way it should be." I wasn't sure if that made me good or simply foolish. Perhaps both. As we pulled into my driveway, Margaret turned to me with a serious expression. "Promise me you'll rest. Today has been too much for you, on top of everything else." I nodded, too tired to argue. "I will. Thank you, Margaret, for everything." Inside my quiet house, I changed into comfortable clothes and curled up on the sofa, pulling Vivian's cashmere throw around me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Finding comfort in a gift from the woman who had now effectively replaced me in my daughter's life, who had stepped into the role of maternal support I had played for 32 years. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Caroline's resting comfortably. Doctor says she'll likely be discharged tomorrow morning. My parents will help us get settled back at their house. No invitation for me to visit again. No suggestion that I might be needed or wanted during Caroline's recovery. Just a formal update, probably sent out of obligation rather than any desire to include me." I set the phone aside without responding and closed my eyes, letting exhaustion claim me. Tomorrow would bring another chemotherapy session, another battle in my ongoing war against cancer. I would need all my strength for that fight. The other battle, for my place in my daughter's life, would have to wait. As autumn deepened into winter, my battle with lymphoma continued. The doctors spoke of promising responses and positive indicators, medical euphemisms that translated roughly to not dead yet, might actually survive this. I endured each chemotherapy session with grim determination, focusing on the fact that every poisonous drip brought me one step closer to the other side of this ordeal, whatever that might look like. My world had contracted to a series of small, manageable routines: Monday appointments with Dr. Mendoza, Wednesday chemotherapy sessions, Friday blood work to monitor my counts. Between these medical milestones, I focused on the basic tasks of survival: eating enough to maintain my strength, walking a little each day to prevent muscle deterioration, resting when my body demanded it, which was often. I had visitors, of course. Margaret came by almost daily, sometimes just to sit quietly while I napped. My piano students sent cards and small gifts, handmade bookmarks, potted plants, recordings of pieces they'd mastered. My sister Elaine called every evening, a ritual that anchored my days. The church ladies delivered casseroles and soup, leaving them on the porch with cheerful notes wishing me well. Caroline did not come. After her emergency surgery, our communication dwindled to occasional text messages, brief, formal exchanges that revealed nothing of substance. Hope you're feeling better. Doctor says my recovery is on track. The house has an offer, closing next month. Nothing personal, nothing emotional, certainly nothing that acknowledged the seismic shift in our relationship. I told myself this was understandable. She was recovering from her own medical trauma. She was adjusting to living with her in-laws. She was processing the sale of her dream home. She needed time and space to sort through these changes. I told myself many things to make her absence easier to bear. December arrived with unseasonable warmth, the Connecticut winter holding its breath. I was sitting on my porch, wrapped in blankets despite the mild temperature. Chemo had left me perpetually cold, when a sleek black car pulled into my driveway. For one wild moment, I thought it might be Caroline, coming at last to bridge the chasm between us. Then the driver's door opened and Vivian Hamilton emerged, carrying a glossy gift bag. "Eleanor," she called, approaching the porch with measured steps. "You're looking well." It was a kind lie. The mirror told me exactly how I looked: skeletal, gray-skinned, with just the faintest fuzz of new hair covering my scalp. The silk scarves Margaret had given me helped, but nothing could disguise the ravages of aggressive cancer treatment. "Vivian," I acknowledged, not bothering to rise. "This is unexpected." She mounted the porch steps and set the gift bag on the small table beside me. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. See how you're doing. Another polite fiction. Vivian Hamilton did not happen to be in the area of my modest neighborhood. Her visit was deliberate, planned, purposeful. The question was why. "I'm managing," I said, gesturing for her to take the other chair. "How is Caroline? Her recovery progressing well?" Vivian sat with her usual grace, crossing her ankles neatly. "Yes, quite well. The doctor says there should be no lasting physical damage. She can try again for a pregnancy in 6 months or so, if they choose to." "That's good news." I waited, sensing there was more to this visit than a casual health update I could have received via text. Vivian glanced at the gift bag. "I brought you something. An early Christmas gift, since I wasn't sure if we'd see each other during the holidays." There it was, the subtle confirmation that I would not be included in whatever Christmas celebrations the Hamiltons would host for Caroline and Derek. Not that I had expected an invitation, but the casual acknowledgement still stung. "That's very thoughtful," I said, reaching for the bag. Inside was a beautiful cashmere cardigan in a deep teal color, impossibly soft and clearly expensive, the kind of luxury I would never purchase for myself, especially now with medical bills consuming most of my disposable income. "It's lovely," I said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Vivian had chosen well. The soft fabric wouldn't irritate my sensitive skin, and the wrap style would accommodate my fluctuating weight. Thank you. I hope it fits. Caroline helped me select the size. Vivian smoothed her already perfect slacks. She remembered you always wore a medium before your illness. The mention of Caroline's involvement surprised me. She had been thinking of me then, had participated in choosing this gift. It was a small thing, but in the emotional desert of recent months, even this tiny sign of connection felt significant. Please thank her for me, I said. And tell her I miss her. Vivian nodded, her expression softening slightly. She misses you too, Eleanor. She's just struggling with everything that's happened. The house sale, the ectopic pregnancy, adjusting to living with us again at her age. It's a lot to process. I understand that, I said, though part of me wanted to point out that I was processing cancer and abandonment simultaneously. She knows where to find me when she's ready to talk. About that, Vivian said, her tone shifting subtly. That's actually why I came today. To talk about Caroline and your relationship with her. I tensed. I wasn't aware my relationship with my daughter required your mediation, Vivian. Not mediation, she corrected quickly. Think of it more as context. There are things you should know about what's been happening, things Caroline hasn't told you. Despite my wariness, curiosity won out. I'm listening. Vivian glanced around the porch as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned forward slightly. The house sale is finalized. They close next week. The proceeds will pay off the remaining mortgage with a small amount left over, enough for a modest down payment on something else. Eventually. This wasn't news. Caroline had texted me about the pending sale weeks ago. That's good, I said cautiously. A fresh start for them. Yes, but that's not all. Vivian lowered her voice further. Derek has been offered a new position, back at his old company, but in the Boston office. Higher salary, better benefits. They want him to start after the new year. This was news. They're moving to Boston? The plan is for Caroline to remain with us until Derek finds suitable housing. Then she'll join him. Vivian studied my face. She hasn't told you any of this, has she? No, I admitted. Our communication has been limited recently. Limited. Vivian repeated the word with a small, sad smile. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. The truth is, Caroline has been avoiding you, deliberately and systematically. Though I had suspected as much, hearing it stated so baldly was painful. I assumed she needed space to work through her feelings about everything that's happened. That's part of it, Vivian conceded. But there's more. Eleanor, Caroline, is deeply ashamed of her behavior toward you, of the way she responded when you needed her help. I blinked in surprise. This was not what I had expected to hear. She told you that? Not in so many words, but I've spent enough time with her these past weeks to see it clearly. The way she avoids talking about you, the way she changes the subject whenever your health is mentioned, the way she obsessively checks her phone for updates from the hospital after your treatment sessions. Vivian's gaze was direct, unflinching. She cares deeply. She's just paralyzed by guilt and shame. I absorbed this, uncertain how to reconcile it with Caroline's apparent indifference. If that's true, why not simply call me? Visit me. Apologize, if that's what she feels is necessary. Because she can't face what she did, or rather what she didn't do. Vivian sighed. When Jonathan and I found out the full story, how you'd been secretly paying their mortgage for 18 months, how Caroline had refused to help with your medical expenses when you asked, we were horrified. Absolutely horrified. We raised Derek to honor family obligations, to show gratitude, to repay kindness with kindness. I can only imagine how painful her rejection must have been for you. The unexpected empathy caught me off guard. It was difficult, I acknowledged, understating the crushing disappointment I had felt. But Caroline made her choice. I've accepted that. Have you? Vivian asked gently. Because from where I sit, you're both suffering needlessly from this estrangement. Caroline is consumed with shame, but too proud to make the first move toward reconciliation. And you're facing a life-threatening illness without the support of your only child. I shifted uncomfortably, the truth of her assessment too accurate to deny. What exactly are you suggesting, Vivian? That I reach out to Caroline? Make it easier for her to apologize? Pretend that her abandonment when I needed her most didn't cut me to the bone? No, Vivian said firmly. I would never suggest you pretend anything. What happened was inexcusable. Caroline behaved selfishly, ungratefully. But she's suffering for it now, Eleanor. And I believe she genuinely wants to make amends but doesn't know how. So you've appointed yourself as intermediary, I said, unable to keep a touch of bitterness from my voice. The bridge between mother and daughter. If that's what's needed, yes. Vivian was unapologetic. Sometimes an outside perspective can help break an impasse. And in this case, I have a particular insight that might be useful. What insight is that? I know what it's like to be estranged from a child. Vivian's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly, revealing a flicker of old pain. Our oldest, Michael, he hasn't spoken to us in nearly 8 years. This was completely new information. In all the years Caroline had been married to Derek, I had never heard mention of an older Hamilton brother. I didn't know Derek had an older brother. It's not something we discuss, Vivian said, her voice tight. Michael had difficulties, addiction issues in college that spiraled out of control. We tried everything, expensive rehabilitation centers, therapy, interventions. Nothing worked. Eventually, Jonathan gave him an ultimatum. Get clean or get out. Michael chose the latter. Last we heard, he was living in Seattle. That was 5 years ago. The revelation of this family secret, this hidden pain beneath the Hamilton's perfect exterior, shifted something in my perception of Vivian. For the first time, I saw her not as Derek's privileged, interfering mother, but as another woman who understood the unique agony of losing a child while they were still living. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. That must be incredibly painful. It is, she confirmed. Every day. Even now. And that's my point, Eleanor. This rift between you and Caroline, it can be repaired. Before it calcifies into something permanent. Before you wake up one day and realize years have passed without contact. I considered her words, feeling the weight of the choice before me. Pride urged me to maintain my distance, to wait for Caroline to make the first move toward reconciliation. But Vivian's warning resonated on a deeper level. How many days did I have left? How many opportunities? To rebuild what had been broken? Cancer had a way of clarifying priorities, stripping away pretense and leaving only what truly mattered. And Caroline, despite everything, mattered desperately. What do you suggest? I asked finally. Christmas, Vivian said. We're hosting dinner at our home. Caroline and Derek will be there, of course. I'd like you to join us. The invitation was both unexpected and inevitable, the logical conclusion to this unusual conversation. Are you sure that's wise? The first meeting after so much tension in such a public setting? Precisely because it's public, Vivian explained. Neither of you would risk a scene. The presence of others will force civility, which can be the first step toward genuine reconciliation. And the holiday spirit might help soften the rough edges. Her reasoning was sound, if somewhat calculating. typical of Vivian to approach emotional healing with the strategic precision of a military campaign. But perhaps that was exactly what was needed. A carefully orchestrated opportunity for Caroline and me to begin rebuilding our relationship. "All right," I agreed. "I'll come. If you're certain Caroline will be comfortable with my presence." "Leave Caroline to me," Vivian said, her confidence absolute. "I'll make sure she's prepared for your visit." After Vivian left, I sat on the porch until the afternoon shadows lengthened, contemplating this unexpected turn of events. The cashmere cardigan lay across my lap, its softness a tactile reminder of the complex web of relationships I was navigating. Caroline, choosing this gift for me while simultaneously avoiding direct contact. Vivian, inserting herself into our estrangement with clear-eyed determination. And me, balancing pride against longing, resentment against love. The next day brought another surprise visitor, Derek, arriving just as I returned from my weekly blood work appointment. He was waiting in his car when Margaret dropped me off, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "Eleanor," he said, climbing out as we approached. "Do you have a minute to talk?" Margaret gave me a questioning look, silently, offering to stay if I needed support. I shook my head slightly. "I'll be fine. Thank you for the ride, Margaret." Once we were alone, I led Derek inside, fighting the instinct to apologize for the modest state of my home. The effects of cancer treatment were visible everywhere. Prescription bottles lined up on the kitchen counter, a hospital bed rented. For the days when climbing stairs to my bedroom was impossible, a calendar on the wall marked with medical appointments in red ink. But this was my reality now, and I refused to be ashamed of it. "Would you like coffee?" I offered, gesturing toward the kitchen. "No, thank you. This won't take long." Derek remained standing, his posture stiff. "Vivian mentioned she visited you yesterday." "She did," I confirmed, lowering myself carefully into my armchair. "She invited me to Christmas dinner." Derek nodded. "That's partly why I'm here, to make sure you know that we would welcome your presence." The formal phrasing was typical Derek, precise, controlled, revealing little. "That's kind of you to say, but unnecessary." Vivian was quite persuasive on her own. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I'm sure she was. Mother can be very determined when she sets her mind to something." "She mentioned Boston," I said, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Your new position there." "Yes." Derek shifted his weight, the only sign of his discomfort. "It's a good opportunity. Better compensation, potential for advancement. We need a fresh start after everything that's happened." "I understand that," I said. "When would you leave?" "I start January 3rd. Caroline would stay with my parents. Initially, until I find suitable housing and get settled." He hesitated. "It's approximately 2 hours from here, Eleanor. Not so far that Caroline couldn't visit regularly, once things are better between you." The consideration surprised me. I had assumed Caroline would be eager to put physical distance between us, that the move to Boston would become another barrier to reconciliation. The fact that Derek was explicitly addressing the possibility of continued connection suggested Caroline might not be as determined to sever ties as I had feared. "That's good to know," I said. "I hope she'll want to visit once we've had a chance to talk." Derek nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "There's one other matter I wanted to discuss. This is for you." I took the envelope cautiously. Inside was a cashier's check for a substantial amount, not life-changing, but significant. "What is this for?" "Reimbursement," Derek said, his gaze direct. "For 6 months of mortgage payments you made on our behalf. It's not the full amount, I know, but it's what we can afford right now, from the proceeds of the house sale. We intend to repay the rest over time." I stared at the check, blindsided by this unexpected gesture. "Derek, this isn't necessary." I never expected repayment. It is necessary, he insisted. To me and to Caroline. I behaved poorly when you asked for help with your medical expenses. After everything you'd done for us, that was unforgivable. This is the beginning of making things right. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever else I might think of Derek, his rigidity, his pride, his occasional tone deafness to emotional nuance, in this moment, he was genuinely trying to correct a wrong. To acknowledge the debt, both financial and moral, that he and Caroline owed me. Thank you, I said, carefully returning the check to its envelope. I appreciate the gesture and the sentiment behind it. Derek nodded, seemingly relieved to have completed his mission. He glanced at his watch. I should go. Caroline doesn't know I'm here. That didn't surprise me. Whatever steps Derek was taking toward reconciliation, he was doing so independently, perhaps even against Caroline's wishes. It painted an interesting picture of the dynamics within their marriage, more complexity, more individual agency than I had previously assumed. Will you tell her about this visit? I asked. Eventually, he said. After Christmas, perhaps. When you've had a chance to speak with her directly. I nodded, understanding his strategy. Better to wait until Caroline and I had begun our own halting steps toward reconciliation before revealing his behind-the-scenes efforts. That seems wise. At the door, Derek paused. One more thing, Eleanor. Your treatments. How are they progressing? The question caught me off guard. Derek had never shown particular interest in my health before, beyond perfunctory inquiries. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. The cancer is responding to the chemotherapy, though it's still early in the process. Good. He seemed genuinely relieved. That's good to hear. If you need anything, rides to appointments, help around. The house. Please don't hesitate to ask. My father would be happy to assist while I'm transitioning to Boston. The offer of Jonathan Hamilton's help was so unexpected I nearly laughed. The image of Derek's reserved, formal father driving me to chemotherapy sessions or preparing meals in my kitchen was almost absurdly incongruous. But the sentiment behind the offer was what mattered. A recognition that I might need support, that the Hamiltons were willing to provide it. Thank you, Derek. I'll keep that in mind. After he left, I sat looking at the envelope containing the check, turning it over in my hands repeatedly. It represented something I hadn't anticipated. The possibility that Caroline and Derek had not only acknowledged their mistake in refusing me help, but were actively working to make amends. Not with empty apologies or vague promises, but with concrete action. The Christmas invitation, the partial repayment, Derek's unexpected visit, all suggested that something had shifted in their understanding of our relationship. That perhaps Vivian had been right about Caroline's feelings, about the shame and regret that had kept her away. Hope, that most tentative of emotions, began to stir in my chest. Not certainty, not confidence, but the fragile possibility that reconciliation might actually be within reach. The week before Christmas brought a worsening of my symptoms, not due to disease progression, Dr. Mendoza assured me, but simply the cumulative effects of chemotherapy. My blood counts were dangerously low, leaving me vulnerable to infection and constantly fatigued. My appetite, never robust during treatment, diminished further until even bland foods became challenging to consume. You need to rest, Dr. Mendoza said during my appointment, her concern evident. Your body is fighting hard. Give it the support it needs. I am resting, I protested weakly. That's all I do these days. She fixed me with a knowing look. Mental rest as well as physical. I understand you're planning to attend a family gathering for Christmas? News traveled fast in small communities. Margaret, who had driven me to the appointment, had mentioned the upcoming dinner at the Hamiltons while we waited. Yes, it's important. Dr. Mendoza nodded thoughtfully. I understand the significance, especially given your situation with Caroline. But your health must come first, Eleanor. If you're feeling this poorly on Christmas Day, you should not push yourself to attend a social event, no matter how meaningful. I need to be there, I insisted. It may be my only chance to reconnect with my daughter. There will be other opportunities, she countered gently. Other holidays, other gatherings. Only if you focus on your recovery now. The implicit message was clear. Prioritize your health, or there might not be future holidays to celebrate. It was a sobering reminder of the stakes involved, of the fragility of my current existence. I'll be careful, I promised. Limited time, no overexertion. But I need to try, Doctor. I need to see her. Dr. Mendoza sighed, recognizing the determination behind my words. Very well. But at the first sign of fever, fatigue, or increased symptoms, you come straight to the emergency room. No delays, no excuses. Cancer patients with compromised immune systems can deteriorate rapidly. Promise me you'll be vigilant. I promised, though we both knew the likelihood of my calling an eye. Ambulance in the middle of a long-awaited reunion with my daughter was minimal at best. Some risks were worth taking, even with the specter of cancer looming over every decision. The day before Christmas Eve, Margaret helped me prepare for the dinner at the Hamiltons. We selected an outfit that would accommodate my diminished frame, while maintaining some semblance of dignity. Loose black trousers, a flowing tunic in a festive deep red, and the new teal cardigan from Vivian. A colorful silk scarf would cover my mostly bald head, and minimal makeup would lend some color to my pallid complexion. You look lovely, Margaret declared when I tried on the ensemble. Elegant, despite everything. Despite everything seemed an apt summation of my current existence. I was functioning, surviving, occasionally even finding moments of joy or peace, despite everything that had happened, despite the cancer ravaging my body, despite my daughter's absence from my life. But tomorrow would change that last part, at least. Tomorrow I would see Caroline, speak with her, begin the delicate process of rebuilding our fractured relationship. Tomorrow, possibly, I would hold my daughter in my arms again, after months of silence and separation. If my weakened body would cooperate, if Caroline was truly ready to reconcile. If the carefully orchestrated meeting engineered by Vivian actually facilitated healing rather than further damage. Many ifs, but they were the only hope I had. The only future I could envision beyond the endless cycle of treatments, side effects, and medical appointments that had become my daily reality. Christmas Eve dawned cold and clear, with the promise of snow in the steel-gray sky. I awoke feeling marginally better than I had in days, still weak, still in pain, but with a spark of energy that had been notably absent recently. Perhaps anticipation was acting as a temporary tonic, pushing back the worst of the symptoms through sheer force of will. Margaret arrived mid-morning, bearing a small gift and renewed concern about my attendance at the Hamilton dinner. Are you sure you're up to this, Eleanor? You could always wait until after the holidays, when you're feeling stronger. I'm going, I said firmly. Even if Derek has to carry me out halfway through, I need to see Caroline tomorrow. Need to begin fixing what's broken between us. Margaret sighed, recognizing the futility of further argument. At least let me drive you. I don't trust you behind the wheel in your condition, especially if it snows as they're predicting. I agreed, readily. The thought of navigating Christmas traffic in my weakened state was unappealing at best, dangerous at worst. Thank you for everything, Margaret. I don't know what I would have done these past months without you. That's what friends are for, she said simply, echoing her words from the day she'd helped shave my head. Now, open your gift. It's nothing fancy, but I thought you might need it tomorrow. Inside the festively wrapped package was a beautiful journal, bound in soft leather with my initials embossed on the cover. It's lovely, I said, running my fingers over the smooth surface. But I'm not sure I understand. For after, Margaret explained. For processing whatever happens with Caroline. Sometimes writing things down helps make sense of them, especially when emotions are running high. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched me deeply. Margaret had anticipated not just my physical needs during this difficult time, but my emotional ones as well. Thank you. It's perfect. That night, as snow began to fall in gentle flurries outside my window, I sat in bed contemplating what the next day might bring. Would Caroline be receptive to reconciliation, as Vivian had suggested? Or would the meeting be strained, formal, ultimately unsatisfying? Would we find our way back to the closeness we had once shared, or had too much damage been done? I had no answers, only questions and the fragile hope that somehow, despite everything, mother and daughter might find a way forward together. As I drifted toward sleep, I clung to that hope like a talisman against the darkness, both the literal darkness of the winter night and the metaphorical darkness of illness and estrangement that had defined recent months. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, and I would face it with whatever strength I could muster, whatever dignity I could maintain. For Caroline, for myself, for the relationship I refused to believe was irreparably broken. Christmas morning dawned with a blanket of fresh snow covering the neighborhood, transforming my modest street into a scene worthy of a holiday card. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the early light catch on icicles hanging from the eaves, and tried to quiet the nervous flutter in my stomach. In just a few hours, I would see Caroline, would sit across from her at the Hamiltons' elegant dining table, would attempt to bridge the chasm that had grown between us. I dressed carefully in the outfit Margaret and I had selected, moving slowly to conserve my limited energy. Each gesture required deliberate focus, fastening buttons, tying my silk scarf, applying the minimal makeup that would give the illusion of health to my pallid face. By the time I finished, I needed to sit and rest before attempting the stairs. This weakness was concerning, but not unexpected. Dr. Mendoza had warned me that my latest round of chemotherapy would leave me particularly vulnerable, my immune system compromised, my stamina nearly non-existent. Under normal circumstances, I would have spent the day in bed, emerging only for the most essential tasks. But these were not normal circumstances. This was perhaps my only opportunity to reconnect with my daughter, to begin healing our fractured relationship. I would endure whatever physical discomfort necessary to make that happen. Margaret arrived promptly at 11, dressed festively in a red sweater with a whimsical snowman brooch. Her cheerful appearance contrasted sharply with her worried expression as she took in my condition. "Eleanor," she said, helping me into my coat with gentle hands. "You look exhausted already, and the day hasn't even begun. Are you certain?" "I'm going," I interrupted, my tone leaving no room for debate. "I've rested, I've taken all my medications, and I have extras in my purse. I'll be fine." She sighed, recognizing the futility of further argument. "At least promise you'll tell me immediately if you start feeling worse. We can leave at any time." "I promise," I said, though we both knew I would push myself far beyond reasonable limits for the chance to repair things with Caroline. Lynch, drive to the Hamiltons' home took longer than expected, the roads slick with fresh snow despite the plows that had been working since dawn. Margaret drove with careful precision, both hands gripping the wheel, her usual stream of conversation noticeably absent. The silence gave me time to rehearse what I might say to Caroline when we finally stood face to face. Should I address the elephant in the room immediately, or allow the conversation to develop naturally? Should I mention her pregnancy loss, or wait for her to bring it up? Should I acknowledge the financial situation that had driven us apart, or focus solely on rebuilding our emotional connection? By the time we turned onto the Hamilton street, a winding lane of substantial homes set back from the road, I still had no clear strategy. Perhaps that was for the best. Authenticity, not careful scripting, would be needed for genuine reconciliation. The Hamilton estate was exactly as I remembered it. A sprawling colonial with perfect symmetry, its red brick facade and white trim made even more striking by the surrounding snow. Holiday decorations adorned the property with tasteful restraint. Wreaths on each window, subtle white lights outlining the roof line, a magnificent spruce by the entrance decorated in gold and burgundy. Margaret let out a low whistle as we approached. Quite the Christmas card setting, isn't it? Makes my little ranch house look positively pedestrian. I smiled weakly, appreciating her attempt to lighten the mood. It's always been intimidating. Even after all these years, I feel like I should be arriving in something more impressive than a sensible sedan. Nonsense, Margaret said firmly, pulling into the circular driveway behind a line of luxury vehicles. You're Caroline's mother. You belong here as much as anyone. If only it were that simple. From the moment Caroline had married Derek, I had felt like an outsider in the Hamilton world. Tolerated politely but never truly welcomed, included out of obligation rather than genuine desire for my company. Today would be no different, despite Vivian's unexpected alliance in recent weeks. Margaret helped me from the car, her arm steady beneath mine as we navigated the cleared walkway to the front entrance. The short journey from driveway to door left me breathless, a concerning indication of my physical state. I paused before the massive oak door, gathering what strength remained. Remember, Margaret said quietly, I'm here if you need me. 1. Text, and I'll create whatever excuse necessary to get you home. I squeezed her hand gratefully, then pressed the doorbell. The rich chime echoed inside, followed by approaching footsteps. The door swung open to reveal Jonathan Hamilton, impeccably. Dressed in a cashmere sweater and pressed slacks, a glass of something amber in his hand. Eleanor, he said, his smile professionally cordial. And Margaret, isn't it? Welcome. Please come in. We stepped into the grand foyer with its soaring ceiling and gleaming hardwood floors. A magnificent Christmas tree dominated one corner, reaching nearly to the second-floor gallery, decorated with ornaments that looked like family heirlooms rather than store-bought baubles. The air smelled of pine, cinnamon, and roasting meat, the unmistakable scent of Christmas dinner in progress. Jonathan led us through to the main living area, where a fire crackled in the oversized stone fireplace. Vivian rose from her seat, by the window as we entered, elegant in a deep green dress that complemented her silver blonde hair. Eleanor, Margaret, she greeted us warmly. Merry Christmas. I'm so glad you could make it, especially with the snow. I scanned the room quickly, my heart sinking when I realized Caroline wasn't present. Had she chosen not to come after all? Had Vivian's assurances been mistaken? Sensing my concern, Vivian added, Caroline and Derek are just finishing some last-minute wrapping upstairs. They'll be down shortly. She gestured toward the seating area. Please, make yourselves comfortable. Can I offer you a drink? Wine, perhaps? Or mulled cider? Cider would be lovely, I said, lowering myself carefully onto the edge of a plush armchair. Even that small movement required concentration to appear normal, to hide the weakness that threatened to overwhelm me. Margaret seated herself nearby, accepting a glass of wine from Jonathan with a gracious smile. Your home is beautiful, especially with the holiday decorations. That tree must have taken hours to decorate. Oh, it's a family tradition, Vivian replied, handing me a mug of fragrant cider. We all participate, even Derek, though he pretends to find it tedious. Caroline has quite the eye for ornament placement. She helped us finish it last night. The casual mention of my daughter participating in Hamilton family traditions created a familiar twinge of exclusion. While I had been alone in my home, Caroline had been here, hanging ornaments, creating memories with her in-laws. The reminder of all I had missed, was still missing, felt like a physical ache in my chest. Before I could dwell on this, footsteps sounded on the stairs, accompanied by murmured conversation. I set my mug down with trembling hands and turned toward the doorway. my heart racing with anticipation and fear. Caroline entered first, her eyes immediately finding mine across the room. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face drawn, shadows beneath her eyes suggesting she hadn't been sleeping well. She wore a simple burgundy dress that emphasized her pallor, her hair pulled back in a loose knot rather than the careful styling she usually preferred for special occasions. For one endless moment, we simply stared at each other, the physical distance between us emblematic of the emotional gulf that had developed over months of silence. Then Derek appeared behind her, his hand at the small of her back. Supportive. Or guiding, I couldn't tell which. "Mom," Caroline said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came." The simplicity of the statement, the vulnerability behind it, caught me off guard. She had doubted I would come? After everything, she still wanted me here? "Of course I came," I replied, equally soft. "It's Christmas." Derek moved forward, breaking the suspended moment. "Eleanor, Margaret, Merry Christmas." His tone was carefully neutral, giving no indication of our private meeting days earlier, the check still tucked safely in my dresser drawer at home. "Merry Christmas, Derek," I responded automatically, my eyes still fixed on Caroline. She hadn't moved from the doorway, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly before her. She looked both younger and older than her 32 years, vulnerable. As a child, yet weighed down by adult concerns. Vivian stepped smoothly into the awkward silence. "Why don't we move to the dining room? Everything's ready, and we don't want the food getting cold." The suggestion broke the tableau. Caroline finally moved, following her mother-in-law toward the formal dining room with Derek close behind. I rose carefully from my seat, grateful for Margaret's steadying arm as a wave of dizziness threatened my balance. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "Fine," I assured her, though we both knew it was a lie. "Just stood up too quickly." The Hamilton dining room was a study in traditional elegance. Cherrywood table gleaming beneath Irish linen, fine china and crystal arranged with precision, tapered candles providing a warm glow that complemented the winter sunlight streaming through tall windows. Place cards in Vivian's elegant script guided us to our seats. Jonathan at the head, Vivian at the foot, Derek and Caroline on one side, Margaret and I on the other. I noted with some surprise that Vivian had placed Caroline directly across from me rather than farther down the table. No avoiding each other's gaze during this meal, then. Whatever reconciliation Vivian had orchestrated, she wasn't leaving its success to chance. The meal began with Jonathan carving the roast, a picture-perfect crown of beef that would have been at home in a gourmet magazine. Conversation remained carefully neutral as food was passed and wine was poured, comments about the snowfall, compliments on the cooking, general observations about the holiday season. Caroline contributed little, focusing intently on arranging and rearranging food she barely touched. I wasn't doing much better, each bite requiring conscious effort to chew and swallow past the tightness in my throat. Halfway through the main course, Vivian set down her fork and looked directly at me. "Eleanor, you mentioned during my visit that you've been continuing your piano lessons throughout your treatment. I find that remarkable, given the circumstances." The deliberate change of subject caught everyone's attention. Caroline's head jerked up, her eyes finding mine with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Not as many students as before," I clarified. "Just a few dedicated ones who don't mind that their teacher occasionally needs to rest during lessons." "You're still teaching?" Caroline asked, the first direct question she had addressed to me since my arrival. "Even during chemo?" The genuine surprise in her voice confirmed what I had suspected. Despite Vivian's assurances about Caroline's concern, my daughter had remained largely uninformed about my daily life during our estrangement. "Yes," I said simply. "Music has been therapeutic, for me and for the students. But the fatigue, The side effects. Caroline trailed off, her brow furrowed. How do you manage? One day at a time, I replied, the standard cancer patient's mantra. Some days are better than others. Mom has good support, Margaret interjected, her tone pointed. Friends who check in, drive her to appointments, help with groceries. The church group has been wonderful about providing meals. The implicit message that others had stepped up in Caroline's absence hung in the air between us. Caroline flinched slightly, her gaze dropping back to her plate. I'm glad to hear that, she murmured. That you have help. Silence descended again, heavy, with unspoken words. I took a sip of water, my hand trembling enough that I had to set the glass down carefully to avoid spilling. The meal was becoming increasingly difficult to endure, both physically and emotionally. The careful dance of polite conversation, the weight of all that remained unsaid, the growing fatigue in my body, all combined to create an almost unbearable tension. Then, unexpectedly, Caroline spoke again. How is the treatment going? Has the doctor given you any timeline or prognosis? The directness of the question silenced even Vivian's practiced social chatter. Everyone at the table looked at me, waiting for my response to this most fundamental of inquiries, one that Caroline could have asked weeks ago had she called or visited. The lymphoma is responding to treatment, I said carefully. Dr. Mendoza is cautiously optimistic. But it's still early in the process, and there are no guarantees with cancer. We take each scan, each blood test as it comes. Caroline nodded, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. I should have asked sooner, she whispered. I should have been there. And there it was, the first acknowledgement of her absence, of the breach between us. Not a full apology, not yet, but a recognition that something had been wrong, that she had failed in some fundamental way. Yes, I said gently. You should have. A single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. She made no move to wipe it away. I didn't know how to face you. After everything. Derek reached for her hand, squeezing it supportively. Caroline? No, she interrupted, her voice stronger now. I need to say this. I've been a coward, Mom. When you asked for help with your medical bills, I panicked. We were already struggling financially, though I never admitted how much. I was terrified of losing our home, our lifestyle, the image we'd worked so hard to maintain. So I said no to you, even knowing what you'd sacrificed for me over the years, even knowing you were facing cancer alone. The raw honesty of her confession silenced the table. Even Jonathan and Vivian seemed momentarily at a loss, exchanging glances across the length of polished cherry. Then, when we found out you'd been secretly paying our mortgage, that you stopped because you needed the money for treatment. I was ashamed, so deeply ashamed I couldn't bear to face you. And the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to bridge that gap. I listened, my heart aching for both of us, for the pain we had caused each other, for the months of separation that could never be reclaimed. I understand, Caroline, I said finally. Fear makes us do things we later regret. I know that all too well. Do you? She asked, her voice small. Do you really understand? Because I don't. I don't understand how I could have turned my back on you when you needed me most, after everything you've done for me. Her self-recrimination was painful to witness. Despite everything, I couldn't bear to see her suffering this way. We both made mistakes, I offered. I should have told you about the mortgage payments from the beginning instead of doing it secretly. Pride got in the way, yours and mine. Caroline shook her head, rejecting my attempt at sharing the blame. No. What I did was worse. Much worse. She looked directly at me, her gaze unwavering despite her tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I am so, so sorry. The words I had longed to hear, delivered with unmistakable sincerity. Yet instead of the vindication I might have expected, I felt only relief. That the silence had been broken, that the first step toward healing had been taken. I forgive you, I said simply, because in that moment, I did. The anger and hurt that had sustained me through months of treatment suddenly seemed less important than the fact that my daughter was here now, reaching across the divide between us. Caroline's shoulders sagged, as if a physical weight had been lifted. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Probably not, I agreed, a ghost of a smile softening the words. But you have it anyway. That's how forgiveness works. It's given, not earned. The conversation might have continued, delving deeper into the wounds we had inflicted on each other, had my body not chosen that moment to remind me forcefully of its limitations. A wave of dizziness swept over me, accompanied by the nausea that had become my constant companion during treatment. I gripped the edge of the table, willing the sensation to pass, aware that everyone was watching with varying degrees of concern. Eleanor? Margaret's voice seemed to come from a great distance. You're white as a sheet. I tried to respond, to assure her I was fine, but the words wouldn't form. The room tilted alarmingly, the elegant table setting blurring before my eyes. I heard Caroline's voice, sharp with alarm. Mom? What's happening? Then I was falling. Darkness closing in from the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw was Caroline's face, terror replacing the tears, as she lunged across the table toward me. I woke to the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. It took several moments to orient myself, to remember the Christmas dinner, Caroline's tearful apology, the sudden collapse that had ended our reconciliation before it had properly begun. A movement beside me drew my attention. Caroline was curled in a chair near the bed, her burgundy dress wrinkled, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. She was awake, watching me with anxious eyes. Hi, I said, my voice a raspy whisper. Hi yourself, she replied, leaning forward to take my hand. You gave us quite a scare. What happened? Fever. Infection. Your immune system is compromised. From the chemo. Caroline spoke with the practiced ease of someone who had been briefed extensively by medical professionals. They've started you on antibiotics and fluids. Dr. Mendoza has been in twice to check on you. I glanced toward the window, noting the darkness outside. What time is it? Almost 9. You've been here about 8 hours. Caroline squeezed my hand gently. Margaret went home to feed her cat, but she'll be back. Vivian and Dad took Derek home to get some things for me. I'm staying the night. The simple declaration, I'm staying, contained volumes. Not just tonight, I understood, but going forward. Caroline was stepping back into her role as my daughter, my support, my family. You don't have to, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew I wanted her to stay more than anything. I know, she replied. I want to, if you'll let me. I nodded, too overwhelmed for words. After months of facing cancer alone, the prospect of having Caroline beside me, flawed, human Caroline, who had hurt me deeply but was trying to make amends, felt like a gift beyond measure. What about Boston? I asked after a moment. Derek's new job? A shadow crossed Caroline's face. We'll figure it out. Derek will start in January as planned. I'll stay here until you're stronger, then we'll discuss options. Maybe I can split my time between both places, at least during the most intense treatment phases. The willingness to adjust their carefully laid plans for my sake was perhaps the most meaningful apology she could have offered. I'd like that, I admitted. Having you nearby again. Caroline's expression softened. Me too. I've missed you, Mom, even when I was too stubborn and ashamed to admit it. A nurse entered then, clipboard in hand, breaking the moment. "Good to see you awake, Mrs. Harlow. How's the pain level on a scale of 1 to 10? I considered the question. Physical discomfort seemed secondary to the emotional healing that had begun. 3, I said. Manageable. The nurse nodded approvingly, checking the IV bags hanging beside the bed. Dr. Mendoza wants to keep you at least overnight, possibly longer, depending on how the antibiotics work. Your daughter has all the details." My daughter. The simple phrase had never sounded more precious. After the nurse left, Caroline shifted from the chair to perch carefully on the edge of the bed. "I should tell you something," she said, her expression serious. "About the house we're selling." "What about it?" I asked, curious about this sudden change of topic. "The couple buying it, they're older, retiring from New York. They wanted a smaller place with a garden, somewhere peaceful." Caroline hesitated. "They've offered us significantly over asking price, which means after paying off the mortgage, we'll have more left than we expected." I waited, sensing there was more to this story. "Derek and I want you to have that money," she continued. "For your medical expenses, any treatments insurance won't cover, home care if you need it, whatever helps you get better." The offer stunned me, not just the financial aspect, which was substantial, but the reversal it represented. After refusing to help with my treatment costs, Caroline was now offering everything she had. "That's too much," I protested weakly. "You'll need that money to start over in Boston, to find a new home." "We have savings," Caroline interrupted, using the exact words she had spoken months ago when I'd offered to help them. "Only this time, I suspected it was actually true. Not a lot, but enough to get started. Derek's new position comes with a relocation package. We'll be fine." "Are you sure?" I asked, searching her face for any sign of reluctance or resentment. "I've never been more sure of anything," she said firmly. "Let me do this, Mom. Let me start making things right." In that moment, looking at my daughter's determined expression, I realized something fundamental had shifted between us. The dynamic that had defined our relationship for decades, me giving, Caroline receiving, had been irrevocably altered. We were entering a new phase, one of mutual support and reciprocity, rather than one-sided sacrifice. "Okay," I agreed softly. "Thank you." Caroline smiled, relief evident in her expression. "There's something else. Derek and I have been talking. If you're comfortable with it, we'd like you to consider moving to Boston with us. Not right away, but after your treatment cycle is complete. There's a wonderful cancer center there for follow-up care, and we could find a place with a separate in-law apartment or something nearby." The invitation was unexpected, but not unwelcome. "What about your in-laws? Wouldn't they expect to be your first priority?" A complicated expression crossed Caroline's face. "Jonathan and Vivian have been incredibly supportive, especially these past few months. I'm grateful for that. But they're not you, Mom. They're not my family in the same way. And after everything that's happened, I don't want to waste whatever time we have left, however much that may be." The acknowledgement of mortality. Hers, mine, the finite nature of all relationships, hung between us, honest and painful and necessary. "I'd consider it," I said finally. "Once we see how the treatment progresses, what the long-term prognosis looks like." Caroline nodded, accepting this measured response. "That's all I ask, that you consider it." We sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady beep of monitors and the occasional footsteps in the corridor outside. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Too much had happened for that. Too many words said and unsaid. Too many wounds still fresh. But it was a beginning, a foundation upon which we could build something new. A relationship between equals rather than provider and dependent. A connection based on choice rather than obligation. As Caroline adjusted my blankets with careful hands, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The shocking discovery of her betrayal. The difficult choice to prioritize my own needs after a lifetime of sacrifice. The unexpected allies who had emerged during my darkest hours. The recognition, finally, that love without boundaries wasn't love at all, but something unhealthy for both giver and receiver. Cancer had taken much from me. My health, my independence, perhaps ultimately, my life. But it had given me something as well. The courage to demand respect, to require reciprocity, to value myself as much as I valued others. That lesson had come at a terrible cost, yet I couldn't regret the wisdom it had brought. "You should rest," Caroline said, noticing my drooping eyelids. "I'll be right here when you wake up." For the first time in months, I believed her promise, believed that she wouldn't disappear, wouldn't retreat behind walls of pride or shame, believed that whatever challenges lay ahead, medical, emotional, practical, we would face them together, as mother and daughter should. "I know you will," I murmured, surrendering to the pull of medication and exhaustion. "I know you will." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.